So we shall start now.
Looking for Martin?
Martin?
Are we live, Martin? We're live, and the camera is on. Okay. And we're recording. Oh, yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming and for preparing the Thank you very much for coming, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for preparing the presentation today and for your reports, which we are going to, the Council will consider today at the session. Since the next speaker is ready with the presentation, I am happy to pass on to the first speaker, Leila Zarouki, with the annual report on children and armed conflict. Over to you, Leila.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by thanking the Human Rights Council for continuous support for my office. You will have all seen the annual report on children and armed conflict that I submitted in pursuant to General Assembly Resolution 67/15-2, by which the Council requested me to continue to provide an update on the implementation of its resolution on children and armed conflict. The current report covers the period from December 2013 to December 2014. However, I will not read this entire quite lengthy report, but I will summarize some of its main points. Firstly, there have been challenges for the protection of tens of millions of children growing up in countries affected by conflict in 2014. In particular, children in 6 countries were affected by major crises. These countries are the Central African Republic, the State of Palestine, Iraq, Nigeria, South Sudan, and Syria. Children were exposed to many grave violations. In most of these countries, conflict was characterized by extremist ideology, sectarian, ethnic, or religious divisions that challenge the response capacity of national authorities and the international community. Those conflicts added to existing challenges from protracted conflicts such as in Afghanistan, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Somalia. A year ago, the world woke up to the horrific news of the abduction by Boko Haram of 276 schoolgirls in Chibok, northeastern Nigeria. The world responded with outrage. Bring Back Our Girls quickly became movement, and rightly so. How can we tolerate seeing our children kidnapped because they are trying to get an education, because simply they are an easy prey? In the past year, Boko Haram's violence has intensified. I visited northeast Nigeria in January. Close to 1 million people had fled their homes in search of safety. I spoke to mothers who didn't know where their children were. The desperation caused by the armed group's brutal tactics was palpable. Boko Haram continued its attacks against schools and destroyed or damaged more than 300 of them. The education system, which is already weak in countries northeast, has been profoundly disrupted. Hundreds of children have been killed, injured, and abducted, and the UN received an increasing number of reports indicating that children are recruited and used by Boko Haram. The armed group has used children as human shields to protect some of its members. In the most extreme cases, they have used children, mostly girls, as suicide bombers. The group's activities and impact now extend beyond Nigeria's borders. Countries such as Chad, Niger, and Cameroon are now hosting thousands of Nigerian refugees, and a regional response has been set up to address the threat posed by the group. What is our response? My office has been monitoring and gathering information about Boko Haram for several months before the abduction of the Chibok girls. Last year, we named the group in the annual report on children and armed conflict for killing and maiming children and attacks against schools and hospitals. The listing triggered the establishment of tools and mechanisms mandated by the Security Council to collect and verify information on violations against children. The listing also allows the UN to better respond, improve the protection of the children, and also to promote accountability. The United Nations continue their advocacy with Nigerian authorities and support all efforts that could lead to the children's release. It seems, ladies and gentlemen, that the mass abductions of children appear to be a new trend in conflict. In the past year or so, we have observed that the mass abduction of children is becoming a tactic of war, mostly used by armed groups exposing extremist ideologies and operating in Iraq, Syria, and Nigeria. Abductions are used as a way to terrorize or target ethnic or religious communities. While the fate of the girls abducted in Chibok is on everyone's mind, we cannot forget that in Iraq and Syria, ISIL abducted over 1,000 boys and girls. I believe my colleague Flavia Pansieri, the UN Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, will go into more details regarding the situation in Iraq. These are cases reported and verified by the UN. We know that there are more children today who are waiting for our help. We also know that this increase in the frequency and scale of abductions is a call for all of us to do more. Last month, during a Security Council, open debate on children and armed conflict took place, where several member states explicitly called for a resolution that would request the Secretary General to name parties involved in conflict who abduct children. I fully support their call because I am convinced that the time has come to make full use of everything we've got at our disposal to protect child victims of abductions. We need timely, reliable information to know what is happening on the ground, to respond and ultimately better protect children. Furthermore, I would like to acknowledge the progress made by the Children, Not Soldiers campaign. It was launched in March 2014 by my office and UNICEF. The campaign is generating positive momentum to end and prevent the recruitment and use of children by government security forces by 2016. The countries concerned by the campaign are Afghanistan, Democratic Republic of Congo, Myanmar, Somalia, South Sudan, and Yemen. Lastly, in my report, I set out a series of recommendations addressed to states parties to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Human Rights Council, and member states to further the protection of children's rights. My office and all the other organizations at UN level will continue to stand ready.
Talking about the appalling issues that we raised in our report that you have received earlier this session. The report is entitled Without Dreams. In this report, we examine the organization and the processes of the Japanese alternative childcare system, the problems found in the institutionalization of children and infants, and also the staggering, the horrible abuses that take place in such institutions. It also considers the difficulties children experience when they leave these institutions and they leave the institutionalized care, and shows the challenges faced by foster care and also adoption. The report concludes by outlining the top priority measures that we urge the Japanese government, and we hope to receive your support. These measures that we would like the government to start implementing immediately. Japan's overwhelming use of institutions instead of family-based care is failing our children. According to government statistics, over 39,000 children in Japan live in different kinds of institutions. It is heartbreaking to see these children crammed into institutions and deprived of the chance to live with a caring family. While other developed countries place most of their vulnerable children in family-based care, in Japan, a shocking 90% end up in institutions. The rate is the highest among industrialized nations, with as few as 1 in 10 children eventually moving on to a family environment through adoption or fostering. As a result, tens of thousands of children are often forced to endure cramped and unsavory conditions in overly large institutions where physical space is limited. They are highly understaffed, and the chances for bonding are extremely scarce. They often suffer brutal bullying, severe suffering, physical, mental, and sexual abuse and violence by both caregivers and other children, by the way. Cruel punishment and intimidation, discrimination, social stigma, the list is lengthy. There are also insufficient mechanisms for children to report these problems and abuse that they suffer. This must end immediately. Living in an institution is especially damaging for children under 3 years old, because they lose the opportunity to bond with the adults. Numerous studies and neuroscientific studies, they show that this puts the children at a high risk of not only mental but also emotional and physical development. Consistent bonds of attachment with parents and adults are important for the normal growth of a child's brain. The bonds of attachment made within the first 3 months of life of a child and the ones made after that period are different, both in depth and in quality. Japan has been creating mentally delayed children by bringing them into these infant homes. Growing up into these institutions, the children also fail to acquire the knowledge and the life skills they will need to live independently once they leave these institutions. So they're very poorly prepared to fend for themselves in the real world. Many end up unemployed. They have very little access to higher education, so they end up trapped in low-paying jobs. And some of them even become homeless. We call for a major reform in the Japanese system, ladies and gentlemen, including the closure of all infant care institutions and the priority of adoption and fostering over institutionalization. This system is highly abusive. It deprives children of family-based care. Numerous studies have also shown the importance of the family settings for the development and well-being of the children. The Convention on the Rights of the Child states that for the full development of a child's personality, they should grow up in a family environment, in an atmosphere of happiness, of love, and of understanding. The UN Guidelines for the Alternative Care of Children calls for adoption, family reintegration, obviously whenever possible, and other secure care in alternative family settings, not institutions. To conclude, I would like to ask for your support in urging the Japanese government to transition its alternative care system away from reliance into institutions and towards a greater use of properly monitored and supported foster care and adoption. I'm going to outline some of the measures proposed in the report, and this is outlined in the report in much more detail. I'm just going to summarize our main measures. Amending Japan's Child Welfare Act to require an independent mechanism, such as a family court, to decide where a child should receive the care, in line with the best interests of the child, not the government, not the institutions. Close all infant care institutions as a part of a plan to transition the care of the children from these institutions into families. Of course, this is a lengthy process. Assign an independent panel of experts to develop a set of policy recommendations and to ensure that adoption is considered before any other long-term options, such as foster care and the appropriate institutional care, which should be for short-term and as a transition. Finally, we'd like to assign an independent panel of experts to make recommendations regarding training programs, support programs, and monitoring mechanisms for foster parents. The foster parents should be properly helped by the government so that this transition can be as smooth as possible. Thousands and thousands of Japanese children each year need new families. These new families are there to love them and to support them. But the current system that is in place places many obstacles in their way. The Japanese government needs to urgently overhaul its alternative care system so that children can form long-term attachments that only families can provide. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Sandra, thank you very much for your report and recommendations, which we again will be considering in this meeting of the Council, and we will meet the representative of the Japanese government and will pass our recommendations to the Japanese government. Thank you very much again. And we are moving on to the next speaker. Please, ladies and gentlemen, please note that the next speaker will be speaking in English and interpretation will be consecutive interpreting. So it will be delivered to our delegates separately. The presentation is on sexual violence and conflict. Over to you, Zina Hava-Bandura.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, for those who do not know me, especially to people watching us on the UN TV live, my name is Zainab Awa-Bangura. I am the special representative of the Secretary General on sexual violence in conflict, and sexual violence in conflict is also known as SVC. I was appointed on the 4th of September 2012. I come from Sierra Leone, and I work there as the Minister of Health and Sanitation. Previously, I was the Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, even though I have worked in many fields relating to people, nothing compares you to what you experience during UN missions. Nothing prepares you to human nature, the good and the bad. I am here present with you today to discuss my latest report. It is the Secretary General's annual report on sexual violence in conflict. And as I mentioned, this report features many sides of human nature. Unfortunately, more bad than good. At least this is what it looks like from the outside. Let me start with the bad, and actually, should I say the ugly. First of all, I am very sad to report that sexual violence is now systematically being used as a tactic of terror. And this is caused by the rise of extremist and terrorist groups. I am here referring to non-state actors such as Boko Haram and Iceland. But they are not the only ones. There are also militias and rebel groups. We have witnessed the devastating effects of sexual slavery and forced marriages. But we have also witnessed that women are often confronted with the choice of starvation or sexual violence to access food. In addition, we would like to stress out that ethnic minorities are increasingly targeted. They are targeted because they are vulnerable and they represent a minority. This is a breach of human rights. Unfortunately, the targeted minorities often try to seek revenge. And this leads to very challenging situations when ethnic groups need to reconcile once the conflict is over. My report answers a statement that keeps on coming back to me. Why are non-state actors such as Boko Haram and ISIL so difficult to stop? This is a question that I'm being asked again and again. It is a fair question. However, the answer is very complex. First of all, they are very sophisticated. They are very well organized. They have developed structures, and they are controlling mass lands. They come across regions. They are not only in one country. And this means that we should be everywhere. Consequently, it is difficult to fully understand where to focus our efforts. These groups know how to communicate with each other, and they are using modern technologies and tools to actually implement a medieval brutality against women. Unfortunately, we do not have the tools. This is why we're working very closely with the Security Council to better understand the situation. Ladies and gentlemen, in my report, we reiterate a very important appeal. The report covers 19 countries in Europe, Asia, Africa, South America, and the Middle East. The countries where these crimes have been committed need to make sure that they have the political will and commitment. Without it, nothing will be achieved. And this is my appeal, ladies and gentlemen. Resources are needed, and these countries need to make sure that the right resources are deployed to the right people. But the right people, who are they? That brings me to the second part of my report, and that is the good of human nature. Unfortunately, it is the good of human nature that has to exist to overcome the tragedies generated by the worst human nature I have ever seen. Let me tell you a story. I remember a woman I met in South Africa. She had been stabbed 17 times by members of a militia. She described the terrible fear and the pain, but she survived. However, the very same woman was also raped by a gang of 5 people who wanted to get her out of the village to take over the land. She looked at me in the eyes and told me that she preferred the pain of the stabbing rather than the abuse she had to endure. And I'm talking about the sexual abuse here. This woman is now helping others to make sense of their lives and to try to overcome similar ordeals during conflicts and wars. During my journey, I have met quite a number of sexual violence survivors. What it has taught me is the resilience of the survivors and also the hope. Most of the time, what women want is for someone to understand. However, do not think that women are the only targets of sexual violence during conflict. Men are also targeted. Unfortunately, this is done in a very different way. The major difference is that men are targeted whilst they are held prisoners or in detention centres. Men have been reluctant to come out and talk about this. But during my visit, and thanks to the UN teams working on the ground, we took the time to observe and build a trust of men who continuously, invariably reported sexual violence during detention. However, we have always looked at it as torture. To conclude, I should be delighted to report that we have made progress. Unfortunately, this is by no means the case. It is not enough. Yes, it is true that we have managed to bring this huge issue to the media. Yes, it is true that we have also managed to apply the UN mandate on the grounds in the countries that were targeted. But remember that this report covers 17 countries. Consequently, we have demonstrated that this is a truly global crime. And as such, it is everyone's responsibility to make sure that we provide global support. My key message to you today is this. no sexual violence related crime will be tolerated during conflicts. Not only won't it be tolerated, but it will also be punished by countries where the crimes took place. The report reinforces the need to promote gender equality. It also strongly recommends that women should be integrated as peace builders. Thank you very much, and I am looking forward to your feedback when this report is published. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zina. Thank you for your passionate report. We will consider all your recommendations here. And for the time being, we have a break, and we resume our work at 12:30. Thank you.
So I'm going to put this on hold. Yeah. So it's this one here? On top. Okay.
Regarding the violation, the mission also verified information received regarding violations of international humanitarian and human rights law perpetrated by other parties to the conflict, and its report, which has been presented to you, also documents those allegations. The report details a shocking range of violations of international humanitarian law and human rights perpetrated by ISIL. This includes genocide, deliberate and widespread attacks directed against civilian populations, suggestive of crimes against humanity, war crimes, and other serious violations of human rights, particularly against women and girls. ISIL is clearly intent on shattering the rich ethnic and religious diversity of Iraq, and has perpetrated appalling crimes against various religious groups, including Christians, Shia, Turkmen, and Yazidis, for no other reason than their religious beliefs or ethnic origin. Information gathered strongly suggests that ISIL may have perpetrated the crime of genocide against the Yazidi population, with a manifest pattern of killing, causing serious bodily or mental harm, and forced transfer of children, aimed at destroying the Yazidis as a group. The mission confirmed reports that during ISIL's incursions into Yazidi-populated cities and villages, men and adolescent boys were systemically separated from women and young children and were summarily executed. Yazidi women and girls were taken as spoils of war. They were transferred to multiple locations where they were sold or given as slaves to ISIL fighters. Numerous interviews conducted by the mission with Yazidi women and girls who recently escaped ISIL captivity provided consistent reports of killings, systematic enslavement, selling of women, and rape, forced transfer of women and children, and inhuman and degrading treatment. The mission report finds that it is reasonable to conclude that ISIL has forcibly conscripted Yazidi and other children between the age of 8 and 18 to participate in the armed conflict in breach of international human rights law, international criminal law, and customary international humanitarian law.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We continue with our deliberations today. We have three speakers in this session. And the first speaker is Marcela Badia Tobias from Colombia, and talking about the Popular Revolutionary Anti-Terrorist Army of Colombia. And over to you.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Marcela Badia Cubillos, and I'm the head of the Colombian delegation to the Committee Against Torture. Mr. Chair, fellow delegates, ladies and gentlemen, before anything else, the Colombian delegation to the 54th session of the Committee Against Torture would like to take this opportunity to reiterate its commitment to the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Colombia has ratified the Convention in 1987 in order to join the global movement to promote freedom and human dignity worldwide. The Colombian government acknowledges the optional protocol of the UN Convention Against Torture, which establishes a system of visits by independent national and international organizations to places where people are deprived of their liberty. However, Colombia believes that ratifying the protocol is unnecessary. Indeed, we have already various internal and independent mechanisms that are in charge of preventing torture in these places. Now, I will proceed to the presentation of Colombia's periodic report on the situation of human rights and torture. This report have been submitted on time and as requested on December the 30th, and we have answered with great care to all of the committee's questions and requests for clarification. I would like to start with an issue which is of great concern to us all. Indeed, this issue is posing a major threat to Colombia's national security and jeopardizing all our efforts to put an end to decades of civil war. I'm talking about the remaining illegal armed group who are still generating in our country violence and abusing human rights. Firstly, I will briefly set out the mechanisms that we have put in place to prevent and prosecute torture in Colombia. Then, I will move on to updating the committee on the actions taken at government level to eradicate once and for all those illegal armed groups, and also to protect the human rights of all our citizens. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the mechanisms in general that we have in Colombia to prevent and prosecute torture. Colombia has made a lot of progress in this regard. Firstly, we have developed a comprehensive legal framework for the prevention and punishment of torture. The act of torture is defined in the Colombian Criminal Code as follows. It is anyone who inflicts physical or mental pain or suffering on a person with a view to obtaining from him or her, or from a third person, information or legal. Secondly, we have strengthened sustainability of this is now ensured since it is now financed two other systems. One to monitor disappeared persons, and another one to provide support to victims of torture or inhuman or degrading treatments. Now I would like to talk about all the action that we have been taking to clamp down on illegal arms and to protect human rights. The eradication of the government. For decades, my country was engulfed in civil war. Almost half a century, all parties around the paramilitary solution was introduced by the right-wing government to put an end to the guerrilla warfare. Paramilitary groups ended up drug trafficking. Or the United States rendered in December 2011. However, a handful of paramilitary members have refused to demobilize and to hand out their weapons. They have organized themselves into new funded militias or criminal bands, BACRIM, as we call them with the Spanish acronym. According to some organization, they are still active in approximately 1,000 municipalities. While their brutality has not reached the previous scale, they are still generating a lot of human rights abuses. Some are used as muscles by landowners and corrupt politicians to threaten and kill local activists and human rights defenders, including dispossessed farmers petitioning for return of stolen lands. Their illegal activities are mostly funded, unfortunately, by drug trafficking benefits. In order to prevent human rights abuses committed by those criminal groups, the Colombian government has focused firstly on strengthening transparency of its action, and secondly on protecting human rights defenders. In order to do so, we have set up a national protection unit with a £120 billion annual budget. This unit, so far, has provided support to 10,000 Colombians, including 2,500 human rights defenders. We have also established a human rights observatory in charge of monitoring human rights abuses and identifying which groups is behind those abuses. Ladies and gentlemen, the Colombian government has pledged to end torture and degrading treatment in its territories. Many challenges lie ahead of us, but we believe that we are moving in the right direction, which is ensuring peace and security to all of our fellow citizens. Thank you.
And presenting the full picture of what is in. We will consider this at our next meeting because we are doing the reports this morning. We'll have two rapporteurs on the situation in Colombia, and we will identify recommendations which we'll pass on to you. Now we move to another region, and we have the representative, a Ukrainian activist, Oksana Kolomyko.
It is an honor for me to represent the delegation from Ukraine. The topic of this assembly is very important. We know that sadly torture, cruelty, inhumane or degrading treatment, and punishments take place in different regions of the world. Cruel medieval Africa and on the Middle East. All of this, of course, raises concerns. This theme, however, is not so remote for Europe, and it is very close to my heart, as I'm now doing a lot of work helping the survivors of tortures in Ukraine. As I'm sure you're all aware, my country has been at war for over a year now, and the number of dead already exceeds 10,000, with hundreds of missing persons and thousands of Ukrainians wounded or otherwise affected. Ladies and gentlemen, I do not need to remind us all what the definition of torture is in the context of the Convention and its Article 1 specifically. I just want to ask you all to hold in your memory the words pain, punishment, and intimidation. Our soldiers, captured in the conflict zone, are often tortured, kept in unacceptable and inhumane conditions, and often are unlawfully killed. A lot of these war crimes are committed with the purpose of punishment and intimidation. Our enemies aim to keep us, Ukrainians, in fear and want to destroy our spirit. Russia denies any involvement in the war at our eastern borders, and yet well-armed, militarily equipped gangs operate there with full ammunition. Allegedly all of them are volunteers, with some regular army soldiers on holidays. One might only question why a full combat war zone would suddenly turn into the most popular holiday destination for so many soldiers of the regular Russian army. On occasion, regular Russian army troops and units of paratroopers with no insignia signs are stopped on the Ukrainian land with full ammunition, with artillery weapons ready to be used. They, of course, say that they were lost, genuinely assume that they were still on Russian soil. We know for a fact that many of the pro-Russian separatists fighting in Donbass are from Chechnya, having decades of proper military experience. Any brigades formed by Kadyrovtsi are deemed particularly cruel, spreading fear in the whole of Ukraine. The first abductions and torture took place at the early stage of the Maidan protests. Some of our activists started disappearing at the end of 2013, beginning of 2014. Some of my wounded colleagues and friends were abducted from hospitals in Kyiv. Some are still missing. Some were found dead in woods with signs of torture on their bodies. Those responsible for these crimes have not been found up until now, and no one has been prosecuted. Not many realize that we now have two wars. One is a real combat war in the Lugansk and Donetsk region, but it's a full-scale media war between Russia and Ukraine. The latter is very dangerous. Media is flooded by horror stories about torture and unlawful killings. Both sides seem to be generous on cheap propaganda and do not hesitate to spread lies or nasty comments. In this stream of lies, the voices of the real victims are often undermined or not taken seriously. Many fear to speak up. Even more do not know who to turn to for help. Just as previous speaker, I will tell you about one recent case. The story of Yuri Sava. He survived captivity and was recently released. His comrade, Igor Branovitsky, didn't make it. Igor was killed by a Russian citizen, Arseniy Pavlov, known as a terrorist, disguising himself under the nickname Motorola. Motorola, by the way, is an internet hero, very popular, with millions of viewings on each appearance. Yuri was captured with others during fierce fight at Donetsk airport in January 2015, just a few months ago. He gave a detailed account later about 6-7 hours of continuous interrogation in the basement, during which soldiers were beaten and tortured non-stop. Who suffered the most was Igor Branovitsky, as he admitted that he was a machine gunner. He seemed to have many fractured bones. He was bleeding and bruised. By the end of the day, all the soldiers who were interrogated were placed against a wall, but Igor Branovitsky was lying on the floor 2 meters away from Yuri Sava. At that point, Motorola came in and pointed at Igor, asking, "What is this body?" Someone said that they called the ambulance to take Igor to the hospital. Motorola looked at Igor, saying, "He won't make it to the hospital." He then got his gun and shot twice into Igor's head. Motorola threatened to kill more of the captured soldiers. He probably did. Later, Motorola, in his radio interview, admitted that he shot 15 captured soldiers. No investigation followed. No charges of war crime have been made so far against anyone. To date, over 2,500 Ukrainian soldiers were released from captivity, but over 200 are still held. This is in breach of the Minsk Protocol signed in February. Ladies and gentlemen, I urge international communities and the UN to use all your power so that any torture and unlawful, inhumane practices in eastern Ukraine are stopped. Our beloved brothers, husbands, fathers, and sons who are suffering now in captivity, tortured by the terrorists, must be released with immediate effect. I urge the UN to use all its power to help Ukraine and stop this war. I urge both Russia and Ukraine to stop your media war that ruins our souls and minds. In conclusion, I realize that there are many conflicts spread around the world today, including many parts of Africa near Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, please remember that Europe now has own very daunting, violent and political war and crisis right here at our doorstep in Ukraine. And this should be a wake-up call for all Europeans. Thank you.
Katrina, thank you very much for your emotional outline. You need to be aware that it will be considered in line with the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel and Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment and the Hague Convention. The Commission is now documenting all incidents, and there will be another report on these tortures in Ukraine. Thank you very much. We need to move on, and we have today Sumaya Rajan, wife of the head of the Bahrain Center for Human Rights. Over to you, Sumaya.
Hello, good afternoon. It's an honor to be with you and to be able to address this assembly. I am Sumaya Rajab and I am the wife of Nabil Rajab, which is an activist in Bahrain. And today I want to talk about torture in prisons, especially in Bahrain. The name of the prison is called the Jaw Prison. First of all, let me talk about my husband and what happened to him. Very recently, in 2004 as well, my husband was arrested for a tweet that he wrote and about an article that he posted in the Huffington Post. This was about torture in prison in the country of Bahrain. On 20th of January 2015, he was sentenced to 6 months in prison. And this arrest really shows a setback in all the activities against torture, and it would not end the crisis in Bahrain. It's a step back for the whole population. My husband has served several prison sentences since setting up the Bahrain Center for Human Rights in 2002. But he started campaigning in the 1990s, and he also became a leader and a campaigner against civil and human rights abuses in Bahrain, including torture and deaths in official custody. He is known for posting tweets and articles. He's very famous for using social media in order to denounce the abuses that are happening in Bahrain, and also he denounces the torture that the Bahrain government is inflicting to people who protest against the regime. During the Bahraini uprising in 2011, my husband led several protests as well, and he has been attacked while he was doing a peaceful demonstration. He was beaten up, he was attacked by tear gas as well, and we received death threats. As well as criticizing the Bahraini government, my husband also criticized the United States for not acting quickly and promptly on the issues that are happening at the moment. However, I know that the international community is very concerned about the events in Bahrain and the torture in prisons. These include Amnesty International, also the European Union, and some American officials. So, based on the events and all the prison sentences, my husband is definitely seen as a troublemaker in our country. When he was arrested, the last time he was arrested, this happened early in the morning. 20 police officers came to take him so that he could go to prison. This was very disturbing for myself and for my family. This, again, is a proof that the government is harassing us. On the 15th of July 2005, which was many years ago now, my husband and other protesters have been beaten up, and now I would like to talk about the conditions, the terrible conditions in the Jewel prison in Bahrain. It is very known to the community that prisoners and detainees suffer mistreatment in the prison. There are also violent clashes between the guards and between the inmates. This happened recently, last month. Because of these clashes, the families cannot visit the prisoners. The visits have been suspended. But it has been reported that detainees, which include journalists, have suffered terrible treatments and torture. They have been obliged to sleep outside in the cold at night and couldn't sleep inside their cell. This was the case for the internationally renowned photographer called Ahmed Humeidan. It's also the case of Hussein Rubail, who is also a photographer. He reported through his family that he's been beaten up and that he slept outside in the cold. The detainees are also burned, and they suffer many other mistreatments. That's why I would like to call the international communities and international bodies to do something about this, to be aware of the issue, because the Bahraini people want to have democracy, we want to have freedom of speech, we want to be able to go to social media and express ourselves freely without having to fear the government and the backlashes. It is important for the international community to continue to put Bahrain at the top of their agenda, because we really want to find a peaceful resolution, but most of all, we want all the prisoners who fight for freedom to be released immediately, and asking for the help of the United Nations to be able to achieve this. Thank you very much for your attention today.
Samara, thank you very much for your report. You need to be aware that thank you very much for your report, and you need to be aware that the General Secretary is planning to raise this issue with the Bahraini government during his next visit to Bahrain, and we will certainly consider this in our meeting today. We are aware of the time, and I think we need to finish our meeting now, so we could resume our meeting, our next session at 2 o'clock. Thank you very much. Thank you.